So our next emerging scientist is Francisco, and hopefully I get this right, Segundo. And he's in his final year of veterinary medical student at the University of Sydney. He's interested in sustainability of production, looking to join the industry early next year as a clinical veterinarian. Take it away, Francisco.
Thank you. So as per the introduction from Josh, I'll be presenting today on a project I did last year on greenhouse gas mitigation strategies in pasture-based farms. So it's a pretty hot topic at the moment. Emissions reduction has become a sort of a worldwide objective across all industries. It's particularly challenging for us in food production industries as we have to meet increasing demands as well. But nevertheless, targets are being set. For example, Dairy Australia committed to a 30% reduction by 2030, comparison to 2015 levels. So soon these targets will become sort of deadlines, if you may, and changes will have to be made. So the objective of the study was to assess the effectiveness of 3 different mitigation strategies on 3 different pasture-based farms, which have contrasting production approaches and levels of intensification. And these 3 farms were located in Uruguay, and you all may wonder, where does that fit in, this whole presentation? But with predominantly pasture-based systems, supplemented with concentrates, a temperate climate, and a slow but steady increase in intensification driving productivity, Australian and Uruguayan dairy farms share a little bit more than what one may think. So now having a look at the farms involved, farm number 1, we classified as a low stocking rate pasture-based, had the lowest productivity of the 3 and fed, for example, only 11% concentrate. Farm number 2 was classified as a higher stocking rate pasture-based system with medium productivity compared to the other 2 and fed 30% concentrates. Finally, farm number 3 was classified as a lower stocking rate TMR. We could argue that they were transitioning. They were still feeding, they were still grazing, only 11% pasture in the diet, but they had the highest productivity out of the 3 farms. Onto the mitigation strategies. Scenario number 1 looked to increase the pasture digestibility. Scenario number 2 looked to reduce the replacement rates to 20% and hence reducing the replacement herd with our source of non-productive emissions. And scenario number 3 looked to increase the percentage of tree cover in each farm to 10%. So now starting on to the results, I think we skipped one. Yeah. There we go. So the lower stocking rate pasture-based farm had the greatest mitigation potential overall. Due to their high baseline replacement rates, a reduction in their rates achieved a 20% reduction in emissions, which is pretty considerable. And then the tree plantations really had a really great effect, reducing by 80%. However, scenario number 3 also depends on the ability of each farm to increase their stocking rate and make that land available for the tree plantations. But given that they had a low stocking rate to start with, this was likely achievable on this farm. The high stocking rate pasture-based system was the one that had the lowest mitigation potential. The only really scenario that yielded some considerable results was the increase in tree plantations, but if we take into consideration that they start off with a pretty high stocking rate already, that's going to be harder to achieve and they get a lesser result in comparison to other farms. So these sort of farms, maybe they have to pick and choose which, if mitigation strategies are going to be related to improved efficiency, then they're going to have to be more picky and identify where they can get better rather than just use the common mitigation strategies. Or they can alternatively rely on like new technologies like feed supplements, like seaweed and all those new technologies that are slowly coming through, and someday maybe they'll be available. And lastly, the lower stocking rate TMR, they had a medium mitigation potential. An interesting thing was the replacement rates did not achieve much of a reduction, but they did have a baseline high replacement rates. And that kind of represents the different emissions profile that they've got, and they have different sources of emissions, being such a more high input farm in comparison to the other 2. And then due to their low stocking rate, they were in a pretty good position to increase their tree plantations and achieve pretty considerable results. 30 seconds? Yeah, good. So overall, what the biggest conclusion from the study, or the biggest takeaway for us, was that reducing greenhouse gas emissions on farm is case sensitive and requires a tailored approach, which takes into consideration these differences in production approaches and levels of intensification, as they will largely influence the results that we obtain.
Thanks, Francisco. Any questions for Francisco? Yep. Sega?
Francisco, interested in the tree planting stuff. With those 3 case studies though, were you planting non-usable area on the farm, obviously?
Ideally, that would be the best scenario.
Yeah, because I mean, that's the difficulty with tree planting, right? I mean, if you've got limited amount of land, productive land, it's a real, you don't want to be planting out milking area to trees. I was wondering, in those particular situations, was that assuming you were just going to plant more of available milking area?
So we didn't focus too much on where, particularly in each farm, but I guess that falls into the tailoring the approach and seeing which farm has better opportunities because they have more non-productive land or less non-productive land, and how they can implement that change,
Obviously use different mitigation strategies on the different farms to a different percentage. How did you kind of make sure that the impact those different mitigation strategies had were from each of those 3 that you applied? How do you know that was the trees and not the...
because, we assessed them individually,
okay,
so we
you
one at a
applied them
time.
at different times?
One at a time. And we used computer-based modeling, so that's what allowed us to look at the different emissions and where the reductions came from because of the results on the program.
You're talking about mitigation, which is, reducing or increasing the particular case study, but what about the overall efficiency in terms of emissions per litre of milk?
Yeah.
Isn't that a more important
so I forgot to mention
thing to benchmark?
Yeah. The measure of emissions that we used in the study was emissions intensity. So for those who may not know, that's the amount of emissions per unit of product, which in dairy we use a litre of fat and protein corrected milk. And that's what our results reflect, emissions intensity.
Couldn't the farm, the high intensity farm was it more efficient overall?
It wasn't. It had a higher emission intensity in the baseline. But that's also, I guess it relates to, because there is a trend, the more efficient or the more productive a farm is, it tends to have a lesser emissions intensity, but I guess it does vary a lot case to case, and sometimes you improve productivity but not necessarily efficiency, and that may have been the case of farm number 3.
Was there, going on from that, per litre, is there any difference between cows that produce high component milk? So, say if you've got a Friesian doing 3% protein and a 3/8 fat compared to a Jersey doing a 3/8 protein and a 4/5 fat, is there any difference between those cows?
Yeah, certainly improving genetic merit of your cattle is one of the main mitigation strategies.
Yeah, but per litre, is there a difference between cows in that kind of strategy in reducing carbon emissions?
Yeah.
So what I found surprising was the relative low impact replacement rates had on mitigating methane emissions. So the replacement rates, was that to say that they were maybe bad to start off with, or were?
Yeah, so that's where the case by case comes into play, because we used their actual replacement rates and then we set the same target for all of them, and the ones that had the lower replacement rates to start with had the lesser effect.
Okay, thanks everybody. Put your hands together for Francisco. Thanks, Francisco.